In this video, we're going to show you how to generate a large amount of QR codes given a data set in Excel. So we are going to start with a very simple data set like this, and we are going to turn it into a final document that has a lot of QR codes according to a code that we have on our Excel document that is tied to a particular item on our Excel document, and it will look something like this. So that is our goal, is we're going to create this today. Okay, so before we start, let's go to Excel. So here is our data set. So we've got our data set. This is what we want to generate a QR code from. So when you're looking at this is very simple. The first thing we want to do is we want to identify what we want to actually represent in the QR code. Here it's relatively easy. You can generate a QR code that gives a lot of different kinds of information, whether that be text or URLs or numbers. We're just going to generate a very simple number that goes with a particular food item. So this is what we want to communicate in the QR code, and that will correspond to these different food items. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a new column, and what I'm going to do with this new column title is I'm going to use a hashtag. So this hashtag is super important in that it tells InDesign that this is eventually going to be in the format of a QR code. So this hashtag is very, very important. You could name it something very obvious, maybe like QR codes. You could rename it perhaps food codes, because that's what we're going to be generating. But just to show you that it doesn't need to be QR codes, we'll call it food. We'll just call it hashtag food. So pretty simple, but we'll see how it shows up in our document. So again, that hashtag tells InDesign that it's going to be in a QR code format. We want it to capture this information here. So we want to capture the numeric information of the food code. So I'm just going to make these equal to this column here, drag it down, and we're all set. Okay, so we have this in our data set. We now want to put this into a CSV format. So I can save this in the Excel file, and then I can save this as a CSV as well. I'm just going to save this as a CSV. I'm going to overwrite this guy. Yep. Okay, and we're good to go. So the next thing, which seems silly but is actually very important when working with InDesign, is you want to close out whatever data set you're working with. So that means that we won't be able to refer back to this. Because of that, I want you to remember these titles, which is hashtag food, food code, food item, as we'll be coming back to those. But again, for whatever data set you're working with, you want to make sure to close out of that data set before you go to InDesign and start doing your merging. So don't worry about that. Okay, so here we are. So a couple of notes about InDesign. InDesign can be found online. It can be there's usually a 7-day free trial option. You can also purchase it for a monthly fee. That depends on if you're a student or if you have certain kind of discounts, but that is where you can find InDesign. And the 7-day free trial, I believe, does include the full package. So use that to whatever your purposes are. So what we're going to do is we're going to generate a new document here. We're just going to create a very basic one. So our default kind of like a letter, I guess. This brings up another good point about InDesign, is that InDesign design is in the name. The main purpose of InDesign is to create final products. So the reason I say that is because if you want to generate a lot of QR codes, maybe to put back into your Excel data set to be used later, or if you're not really interested or you're not sure what your final format is going to look like, then this might not be the best place to start. But in terms of generating QR codes for your final design or for your final product or whatever is going to be used in the field or in your business or whatever you're going to be using these QR codes for, you want to be thinking about the final product here. So let's get started. So the first thing we want to do is we need to tell InDesign what we are working with. So this has actually already come up. We need to get this to come up though. Where did I find this? I went to Window, Utilities, and then I went to Data Merge. So Window, Utilities, Data Merge, and that will bring that little menu back up. It might come up as a little longer on this side, or it might be a different size, but that's okay. These three little options here, these three hints is what to do, should come up. These aren't things that I typed in, but these should be something that come up on your version of InDesign as well. And our next step is we want to tell InDesign what data set we're going to be working with. So we click this little tiny menu here, and we select data source, and we want to find what we were just working with, which is the QR code sample. So I open this up, and check it out. So these are the different column titles that we just saw in our data set. So notice that we have food, food code, and item. Food code and food item are text formatting. That's because they were just written as texts. But you'll notice here that this one is a little symbol that is kind of like a little QR code. And the reason why InDesign generated that is because we put the hashtag. So again, that hashtag made all the difference. And any text that we had after our hashtag just came up directly as a title here. So we had hashtag food, so it says QR code and food. Okay? So for my example here, I had a list of different foods and then I had some QR codes. So let's say that I want to make a document where I just have as many QR codes as possible on a document. So we're going to try to generate as many QR codes that are kind of workable and visible on a document. And so to do that, we're going to use this rectangle tool here. So we hit this rectangle tool and we're going to create our first rectangle. This one's going to be a small one, and I'll show you why we're going to do that initially. So I'll leave lots of room, make sure it's significantly less than halfway. And what I want to put here is I want to put the food item. So the QR codes alone don't do me much good if I don't know what they correspond to. So I'm just going to hit food item once, and notice that food item comes up. If I want to edit it, and if I want to make it maybe more central, I can kind of come in here and just kind of raw here, just using the space bar. Cool, yeah, we'll put it right there. A key thing about this is that it will put your text in wherever the food item little option thing here begins. So right now it might look like this is more central, but if your titles aren't this big, they won't come in as central. So, and that'll even change for different food items. So as long as you have it approximately central, I think that'll be good enough for our purposes here. Okay, so I've got food item centralized here. So that tells InDesign, when it's going through and merging the data that we will do later, that it's going to put every individual row from our data set into our document here. And when it's doing that, we're telling it to put all the food items in a box that looks like this. Okay, I'm going to generate a second box here, a little bit bigger, because what I'm going to be putting in this box is the QR code. So what I do, my box is highlighted. If your box, for some reason you click somewhere else or you come back and you need to re-highlight it, you should be able to click with this tool, but if you really get stuck, this tool is usually pretty easy to click with. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the QR code, and you'll notice that it comes up kind of in this blue font, and it kind of highlights it, and it says food here. That means that, again, similar with the food item, when InDesign is scanning through your data set that you put through, for every single row, it's going to put a QR code here that corresponds to the data found in the food, or the hashtag food, column of our data set. Okay, so you'll notice we've only really done any kind of design in this top left-hand corner here. So that's very intentional. The nice thing about InDesign is that it can kind of take your basic design and it can expand it for your purposes depending on what you want. So we'll go through what I mean by that now. So again, we've got our basic design down, and now we need to tell InDesign what to do with it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to return to this little menu box here. So we have a lot more options here. What we're going to do is we're going to create our merge document. So it's the sixth option down. Hit this here. This is a great little, pretty small, but there's some very helpful things here in terms of making the formatting look like you want it to. Okay, so let's go back to that idea that I was talking about in terms of how come we haven't done anything with the rest of this page here. So there's two options. There's a single record where you're telling InDesign that every time, so let's say that I think our the document or the data set that we were working with had about 10 rows. So if you had a single record and you were to merge it with a single record, what would happen is that for every row, InDesign would put a food item name in, and it would put a food QR code in, and then it would generate another page, and it would do the same thing. So essentially you would have, again, if we had 10 rows, you'd have 10 pages that looked like this, and each one would have a different food item and a different food QR code. Now, for our purposes, if we want maybe a more condensed document where we have as many QR codes and as many food items on the page as possible, that kind of sounds like a waste of space, so we're not going to do that. But that option can be really nice, for example, if you have maybe a big picture here, or if you're generating ID cards, or you have kind of a uniform text, and the only thing you want to change is the food and the food item. That can be really helpful for those things there. Another thing you could do, so as I mentioned earlier, that this might not be the best tool to use if you're trying to put QR codes back into Excel. You might be able to mess around with this option, or maybe some different formats of the blank document, and try to put it in a format that is easily copy and pastable. So maybe if you had all the QR codes in the correct order, maybe you'd be able to copy and paste them all and then put them back into Excel. I haven't experimented with that myself, but that's an option that you could try out. Okay, let's get back to our purposes here. So what we're going to do is we're going to do multiple records. So what this tells InDesign is I want you to replicate this small little kind of unit that we have going on here in the top left hand side of our page as many times as possible on a page until you've run out of the rows. So you can kind of see that communicated in this little diagram here. So with multiple records, you're telling InDesign, again, take the one design that I had, kind of indicated by this X within the box here, and then replicate it as many times as possible. So that's what InDesign is showing us here at the merge document, with 4 coming out of 1. With that, again, you can really help with the layout here. Pretty basic. You can mess around with this to make it as aesthetically pleasing as you'd like, or whatever kind of document you're trying to make. This just gives you the margins of the document. This tells you the spacing, which is kind of nice. So if we're working with something where data collectors are going to be scanning QR codes, it's nice to put in a margin just so there's some space in between the different entries, and hopefully we'll be able to see that in our final product. Okay, so I've got 3 and 3 there, and there's some other options you can mess around with if you'd like, but we're not going to do that now. So we should be good to go. We've got multiple records, we have our spacing in there, margins are fine, options not going to mess with, so let's merge. Okay, alright, cool. So it looks pretty nice. So you'll notice here what InDesign has done is, again, it has gone through and it has put the unit that we designed as many times as possible on the page. It looks like this gap down here wasn't quite big enough to fit the whole thing. And it has done that for every single different food item. So we had, again, everything from spinach to rice, and then it is a different QR code and a different food item for each one of these entries. Okay. Another thing that I'd like to point out is that you'll notice that we have some gaps here, and this is the spacing that came in. So if I had not put that 3 spacing, both for kind of in between, I guess you could call that vertically, and in between horizontally, then these would have bumped right up against each other. But because we put that spacing in, you've got a little bit of a gap there, which is kind of nice. And again, for your final format, you've got a nice gap between your QR codes. For anybody who's scanning those QR codes, they're not really touching each other, which is nice. Okay, and that's it. So again, pretty easy. You can mess around with the formatting to make it look however you would like. But again, if you are looking to generate a large number of QR codes based on a data set and you are aware of what your final document is going to look like, then this is a quick and easy tool to use to do that.